All right, we're back with the 2014 Polaris RZR 900. In the last video, I traded my 400EX for this thing, and I was told all it needs is an exhaust because they put barkers on it, and one of them was sounding really bad. So once I got it back to the shop, I realized it was only running on one cylinder. It was literally shooting flames out the exhaust. So I actually ended up getting it running good, and I got the other exhaust fixed, but it had a really loud noise coming from the motor.
This sounds bad. What is that noise?
After I got it all torn down, I found out that it spun a rod bearing, and the noise I was hearing was it rod knocking. So I got all these cases cleaned up. You can see all the surfaces are clean. Got all the metal out of the cases. And I've got the new crank over here. You see it's the crank, rods, and then the bearing kit, gasket kit. So I decided to go with hot rods. This is the brand I always use whenever getting new crankshafts. I don't ever get OEM ones because they're outrageously expensive. But I've used these on 3 different rebuilds before, and I've never had an issue with them. Hot rods used to have issues with their crankshafts, but that was a long time ago. You know, from what I've heard now, they're just as good as OEM, if not better. Meets or exceeds OEM standards, so we'll put it in this one and just see how it holds up, but I'm pretty confident in it. So I have everything I need here except the oil pump chain because I'm not going to reuse this one. But I can actually go ahead and get these rods on the pistons because I'm going to reuse this top end. They both had over 165 PSI when I checked them, so we'll just get these rods swapped out, and then I'll get this cylinder back in the case over here and get this flipped over and get it ready for the crank. I'm still not entirely sure why only one side burned out like that, because this side literally looked fine, and you can literally see on this cap how black this one is, like it got like super hot. But this one still looks perfectly fine. So tell me how one side got that hot and one side looks perfectly fine. Looking in these cases, I went ahead and blew out all these little passages. So you can see there's oil passages here for like the main bearings. That goes down in the case right there. It goes down where your oil pump is. You can see that's where the oil pump goes. It sits in there like that. And then it pulls in from the sump right there to the screen. And then it pushes oil pressure out to that passage there. So that's where all the beginning supply of oil comes from. And straight up to the crank bearings here. I'll put a little diagram on the screen so you can kind of get an idea of how it works. But basically, the oil pressure comes in here, pressurizes these main bearings. And from there, see, there's a hole there, hole there, a hole there. On all the main journals. There's not one on this one, but those line up with the journals in the cases, and that pressurizes the crank, and that's how the rod bearings actually get oil. See the journal there? Right there. And there's one over here for the starter gear, but I'm pretty sure the oil comes into the crank from these main journals because there's nowhere else it could come in from. But you can see on the case over here, this is where the crank, the end of the crank would sit, and it's just empty. So there's not like a passage that comes in and pressurizes the crank from the end. And you know, the other side's where the clutch sits. So it doesn't actually pressurize it from the ends like some cranks do, like the 400EXs. It doesn't pressurize the crank from either end. It actually pressurizes it from the main journals. So I'm not sure why only one side would burn up and the other side's fine, unless, you know, one of these journals is clogged up in this crank. But since it is all in there, replacing the crank should fix it because, you know, it's all brand new. So I blew out all those passages in the case. So hopefully we won't have an issue. But we'll get that oil pump chain in and then we'll start putting this thing together.
Ow.
Okay, so always wear safety glasses when taking that pin out, but I guess I'm gonna have to start wearing freaking gloves too. That thing's a freaking lethal weapon, dude. I mean, just comparing them to each other, they literally look identical. I'm gonna put it back on the exact same way it came off, both sides. Okay, so you think I would have learned my lesson the first time. I took it out, flung out, hit way up there somewhere, fell down, and I can't find it. So luckily, I still have these old pistons from my old rebuild. My other 900 I have, so I could just take the clips out of these. All right, so we got the rods on. We'll go ahead and get that base gasket on the case right here, and then we'll go ahead and put that top end on. All right, so now I can go ahead and get all these main bearings out. You can see they're all still in there. Then you got the balancer bearings up here too. So we get all these journals cleaned up really good, get all the new bearings in, and I'll have to do the same for this case half over here. Just went through and inspected all these little main journals too, and they all still look perfect. The only spot that was a little messed up is right here where the balancer goes. You can kind of see there's a little bit of scratching right there, but it's nothing major. So we're all good there. We'll just get all these new bearings in, and I gotta wait on that oil pump chain because you can't put these cases together without the chain on there. It goes right here, so once the crank's in there, you can't get it back on there. So I gotta wait for that to come in before I get the crank put in. Finally got this oil pump chain in. So now we can go ahead and get this crank in. I also got a new seal here, crank seal. It comes in this gasket kit, so we'll get that swapped out as well. But like I said, we are gonna use the old timing chain because it still looks brand new. So we'll go ahead and get this new oil pump chain and the new seal. on this crank. We'll get it dropped back in the engine. All right, we'll go ahead and get all these new bearings in. If you didn't know, there's a number here on the case, and you use those numbers along with the numbers on the crankshaft here. And there's a chart in the service manual that tells you basically what bearings you need based off the crank you have and what cases you have. Since I got mine all in a kit, they actually had me send them the serial numbers on the cases beforehand. So they already matched the bearings for me. But I will go ahead and verify with this crank numbers and make sure they're the right bearings. So I verified my numbers. You can see down here, the case numbers is just 4 2s. So they're all 2. And then on the crank, it's 4 Gs. So it's all G. So you can look on the chart here, 2G is the green bearings. So all 4 main bearings are green bearings. You can see here in the kit, they gave me all 4 green bearings. So we're good there. We can go ahead and get these bearings in the cases. The way I do it is they got like a little tab on there. I just line that up with the tab on the case. And just press them down. Make sure they're level. And then for the rod bearings, you have numbers right here on the rod. So these are 2. That one's a 2. And on the crank, you got B and B, so 2 and B. And you can see we need the green bearings, which these are. All of them are green. So we can go ahead and get these on the rods. And that's all it is to it. Now I can go ahead and set this crank and balancer in. Now I just gotta put the bearings and the rod caps. So the torque specs for these are a little confusing, but I'll pull it up on the screen so you can get an idea of what I'm doing. All right, I got them rods all torqued down. Now I can get this balancer shaft in here. It does have timing marks. You see it's got to line up the mark on the crank. You see the timing marks are lined up. So this is all that goes in the cases. I'm gonna go ahead and get bearings in this other case half and then get some RTV on here. There is like a little path you're supposed to put it on. You're not supposed to put it on the whole surface, just like on the edges. But basically I'm just going around the very edge, avoiding these major oil passages. And make sure it's sitting flat on the dowels. Yep, that all looks good. So now I can go ahead and get these main bolts back in. I'm gonna tighten these down snug and then just let this sit for a while because it's super cold out here right now. It's literally like 30 degrees. So I'm gonna let that RTV set up just a little bit before I torque them all down. All the bolts with washers on them are the actual main bolts here. And then there's two more up here. They're a little bit smaller, you can see. And they don't have washers on them. And then there's one little 8mm. It goes right there on this side. All right, this thing's been sitting for a while. I'm gonna go ahead and get these torqued down. I'll pull up the sequence on the screen so you can see what I'm doing. Now we're gonna go up to 21 foot-pounds. All right, so now you can see I gotta go an additional 90 degrees on all 8 of these bolts, the main bolts. And then these 2 bolts up here are just 26 foot-pounds. All right, so now I can get this oil pump back in here. You don't want to forget your little O-ring, very important. And that's literally all that goes in here under the oil pan. Okay, so my gasket kit don't actually have a gasket for this, so I'm just gonna put some RTV on it instead. And that's all I gotta do on this side. So I'll go ahead and get this thing flipped back over. So now I'm gonna go ahead and put all these other case bolts. There's still two 13 millimeters here, and then a couple 8 millimeters all the way around. I'm gonna go ahead and get this little oil cooler on too. A lot of people in the comments actually corrected me because I thought the way this worked was, because you can see there's oil passages right to the main oil line right there. So I thought this thing ran oil to the water pump, and that's kind of what oiled it up, but you can see that these passages go right into the opening here. So it actually cycles water through this brick, and then on the other side of the brick, the oil cycles through. So it's an oil to water oil cooler. I've never actually seen anything like this before, but it's pretty cool how all that works. I appreciate you guys correcting me on that. I probably never would have noticed that if y'all wouldn't have said anything. I'm the type of person that loves to learn new stuff, so if you see me doing anything wrong, please call me out on it. I read everybody's comments. I might not reply to everybody, but I definitely read everybody's, so if there's something you think I'm doing wrong or something you think I don't know, don't be scared to leave a comment. I'd love to hear what you got to say. One of these bolts are stripped. I had to cut out, so I just put a 10 millimeter there instead. You can see how the RTV is nice and dry now. I always go back over it and just kind of wipe off the excess, just because it looks way better without that little seam on there. I'm gonna go ahead and get this flywheel and stuff back on, get this cover on, just so I can pretty much get the whole bottom end finished out before I go over there and mess with that head. So you're not supposed to put oil on this taper, but because this is a new crank, I want to put some right here on this where the starter gear goes. So I'm just trying to avoid putting it on this taper right here. All right, guys, well, if you're like me and somehow lost your strap wrench, you probably have done something as dumb as I'm about to do. I have no idea if this is gonna work or not. I literally just have a ratchet strap go into the engine stand, wrapped around the flywheel. So this thing is supposed to be torqued to 133 foot-pounds, which is a lot. So I'm hoping this strap will hold it, but I guess we'll see. this is terrifying. Okay, so the problem is this whole engine's tilting and I don't want to break that off. Oh my gosh, I feel like it's about to blow up in my face. Oh, that's 100 foot-pounds. Now we're gonna try to go to 133. Oh my gosh. Okay, that was absolutely terrifying. The only sketchy part was just because, you know, it's barely mounted into the cases right here and it's wanting to twist this whole thing. But I mean, it worked. 130 foot-pounds. You can see it was tilting, so I just put a strap on the other side to hold it, which was about to fly off. But I mean, it worked. So if you're in a pinch, a ratchet strap will work. If you can just find somewhere good to mount it. Because if this was still like in the frame over there, you know, you could just wrap it around and go straight to like the frame mount somewhere. And this would be mounted in the frame, so this wouldn't move. So I mean, honestly, it wasn't that bad. I don't know if anybody's ever done this before. I just kind of thought of it. But it definitely works in a pinch. All these bolts are the same size, so you ain't got to worry about where they go. All right, so the whole bottom end's back together. This thing's pretty much ready to put the head back on, but before I do that, I did get all new valve seals. So I'm gonna be pulling all of these valves out, lapping them and replacing the seals. They honestly don't look too bad of shape. It probably would be perfectly fine without doing this, but I'm gonna go ahead and swap them out anyway. I'm gonna have to keep in mind which shim goes where because you don't want to mix all these up. But I'll go ahead and do one just to show you what I'm doing. And then I'll do the other 7. I really hate doing valve work just because it's really tedious. You know, if you just do one, it's fine, but you got to do the exact same thing 8 times. So it gets old really fast. Also, you can see where I put that spacer on that spark plug, like the plug's in there. It's just way back in there. So I have no idea how that piston was not hitting this thing, or at least hitting a valve or something. Because I mean, it was literally hitting this piece enough for it to hit the electrode. So it was literally hitting as far back as that electrode is, but it wasn't making contact with the head at all. So I guess I got lucky with that, but We'll go ahead and get these valves out. So in order to do this, you just need a little kit. Find your right size. Fit over that. Pops on there. You see those little keepers is just what holds that spring on there. Now you can start releasing it. Now, pull the spring out, and that little valve seal's down there. So we get that one pulled out real quick, and we'll put a new one in. These valves actually look fine. They don't look like they need to be lapped. You can see that's the old valve seal. So we'll just get the new one swapped in. It just kind of snaps on there. So these don't really look like they need it, but I'm gonna go ahead and lap the valves anyway. You just put some grinding compound on your valve, slide it back in there. And then make these little suction cup things. Basically, just stick it on there and twist it back and forth. But basically all you're doing is just matching that surface right there, that little angle, to the surface of the actual valve seat. You just want to make sure that's a good seal. And you can see it was touching all the way around evenly. So these really didn't need any anyway. But you do want to make sure all this is cleaned out before you go back together, because that grinding compound will wear stuff down super quick. So you just want to make sure it's super clean before you put it all back together. And that's all it is to it. You can see, so you basically just push that in, and then those keepers are able to fit in there. But whenever the spring springs back, there's not enough room for them to fit because it's a tapered fit. So that's how they hold in there. You can see it's all good now. And put the little bucket shim back in its spot. And then move on to the next one. So it's really not that bad at all. The only thing that sucks is you got to do it 8 times on this bike. So I'll go ahead and get this other 7 done. And then this thing will be ready to go back on the motor. All right, I got all the valve seals swapped out. Got it all cleaned up. I was ready to go back on the block. Sure it's all on there flat. Looking good. So we'll go ahead and get all these head bolts in, get it secured down. And these head bolts have a torquing sequence you have to do. So we'll go ahead and get that done real quick. So first we're gonna go to 21 foot-pounds. And then next is 26 foot-pounds. Same sequence. All right, so now I gotta go additional 180 degrees, which is just 1/2 turn. And that's all it is to it. That's all bolted down now. All I gotta do is get these cams back in. It is on top dead center right now. You time it up with the PTO side and it's sitting on top dead center. But I'm gonna go ahead and take this little crank sensor out and just verify my timing before I put the cams back in. Yep, you can see the mark on the flywheel is all lined up. You line it up with just this piece right here. So you can see that's in time. So now I can just go ahead and get these cams in. So you can see the way these work. For the exhaust cam, even with the head, intake cam, even with the head. That's how you time it up with the timing mark. But the problem is, with them sitting like that, these lobes are actually on those valves. So it won't actually sit down, you can see. It's like that because you're timing up the rear cylinder. You can see how those are off the valves. But this one's not on top dead center. So what you gotta do is get it timed up, and then I just put the clutch on here. It's the easiest way to turn it. And then just roll it back. So that the cams stay in time with each other. But now you can see these lobes are off the valve, so it's sitting down. So now you can see they're not even with the head because I had to turn it a little bit. But I'll go ahead and get all these caps back on, put the tensioner in, and then when I turn it back, these should be even with the head, and this line should be here. All right, so now I can release this tensioner. And we should be able to roll this thing back to top dead center. So our mark is back in place. The cams are both even with the head. So that's all good. We can go ahead and get this cover back on. And I'll get this little crank sensor back in here. And that's pretty much it. We do have to put this little hose that goes from here to the head. But that's pretty much it. We can go ahead and get this thing back in the side by side. I completely forgot this bracket mounts on there. So I'm gonna have to take those bolts off and remount it, but and just like that, this thing is done. So you can see the only thing left over here is this motor mount. So I'll go ahead and get this hoist over here, get it hooked up, get that motor mount on, and then we'll be able to get it back in the frame. I got the motor all in there. Got it all lined up with the transmission and bolted down. I went ahead and gone through and plugged up all the little stuff like the ground wire and the starter wire, coolant temp sensor, stator, crank position sensor. I went ahead and got the coolant lines hooked up here and on the bottom. I'm gonna go ahead and put this intake back on before I start messing with this belt box. I took it off all in one piece, so I should be able to just put it all back on in one piece. Got to plug up the throttle position sensor. And then this is just for the idle air controller on top, fuel injectors. Got that thing secured on there. So now I'm gonna just go through, hook up these fuel lines. I'll go ahead and get this brace put back in too. All right, now we can go ahead and start getting this belt box back on. We'll start with that first little cover. Then this just gets torqued to 96 foot-pounds. And then all that's left is this little cover. Now that I got all that on, I can go ahead and get this little brace that goes on right here. And that'll allow me to get all this other stuff plugged in. So you want to make sure all your breather lines are up here. This one's for the transmission, this one's for the front diff, and then this one's for the fuel system. They just go inside this little tube right here. So that's where I'm going to put them. You can see these go inside that tube. And these fuel injectors are numbered. You can see this one has PTO on it. This one has mag on it. And that's pretty much it. I'm gonna go ahead and get this exhaust on next. I went ahead and pulled this left plug out and took my little spacer out because I'm not going to need that anymore. And now I can go ahead and get the spark plug boots in. And all I gotta do is put some oil in this thing and some water. I am still waiting on an oil filter, unfortunately. So I might just go buy one locally, put some oil and water in this thing and fire it up before I put all these plastics and stuff on. It's always very nerve-wracking doing the first start after a rebuild, but I'm pretty confident in it. I'm gonna go ahead and get these little breathers on too, because that's what holds this mount down. So we'll get those bolted in. All right, all I gotta do is get some oil and water in this thing and it'll be ready to fire up. Now you can see that's not wanting to go down. I'm gonna come in here and back this little bleeder screw off, you see right there, and let the air out of the engine. So you can hear all that air coming out. So we'll just get all that air out until it's just water coming out. All right, so the air came out and there's still no water, so we'll go back over here. You see there's no more water in here, so we'll get this filled back up. Let the rest of the air out. All right, so now you can see it's just water coming out. So I'm gonna just keep doing that a few times until I get all the air out there and it doesn't take any more here. All right, I got the coolant system bled. I got oil in it. So next I'm just gonna turn it over until I see oil coming out of this right here. I just wanna make sure that it's primed up to the oil filter, and then I'll fill the oil filter up with oil and put it back on, turn it over a few more times just to make sure the system's primed up. Before I do that, I need to go ahead and pull these plug wires so I can make sure it doesn't start up. All right, let's see if we can get this thing to prime up. All right, there it is. Oh yeah, it's priming up good. All right, got the filter all filled up. Just get it screwed on there. Hopefully not make too much of a mess. I'm just gonna get a hand tight. All right, so I cycled it over several more times, topped it off on oil, topped it off on coolant, bled the coolant system one more time. So now it is officially ready for the first start. Honestly, I'm kind of nervous, not gonna lie. It's always scary doing the first start after a rebuild, but hopefully all that hard work was worth it. About to find out. I already got the spark plug wires all hooked up, so it should fire right up. It is definitely not wanting to run. Huh. I wonder if this little idle air thing is working. It doesn't sound like it is. Let's see. Oh, there it goes. Huh. Okay, so I think all it is I didn't unplug the injectors when I was turning it over a lot, so I think I just kind of flooded the cylinders quite a bit. So I'm gonna try and just give it a little bit of throttle and it should clear up. This thing is so loud. Oh my God. It sounds so good though. I can literally feel the floor shaking. So we'll just let it warm up a bit. I'll keep checking that coolant bleed screw. We'll just let it get up to temp. Alright, so I'll let this thing get up to temp. Went through and checked the oil, the coolant, the bleed screw and everything, and all that's perfect. It's not leaking or anything. So let this thing come up to temp and we'll see if the fans and everything's coming on. So I had to get a little bit more air out of the coolant system, but everything else was good. This thing is taking forever to actually get up to temp, so I think I'm just gonna go ahead and put the rear plastics on and take this thing for a little ride and see if we can get it up to temp and just make sure the fans and everything's working. But once we get it running real good, I'm gonna go ahead and turn my attention to these plastics because I really wanna get the red back out of them. There were several comments saying that you could take a blowtorch to them and bring the plastics back. I've seen them do that before, but I'm not sure if this is the same type of plastic. But I mean, they're already so bad that I don't even care if I mess them up, so I'm just gonna try it. I also got some speakers that I want to hook up in it, and I want to try and get this heater working, because the way this works is just like a heater in a car. You can see it has radiator lines that goes to the radiator. It basically just tapped in right here. So this is the coolant line for the radiator, and then that goes to the heater core for the heater on both sides right here. So it basically just goes through and cycles through. Basically the way it works is just like another radiator. It goes in, has a radiator in there that the fan blows through. Then that hot air is what goes out the vents. So it's kind of like having a little mini radiator up there, and all the hot air gets blown onto you. So we'll go ahead and get these plastics on and take it for a little ride. All right, you can see I kind of just pieced this thing together, zip ties and stuff, because I am going to be taking all this stuff back off. So I do plan on snorkeling this thing. I'm going to be going on a mud ride here in a couple weeks, so I'm going to attempt to build a snorkel kit for this thing. That's why I left all the bolts out. But we'll go ahead and take this thing for a little ride and just see how it does. It should fire right up now. still hasn't got up to temp yet. It is kind of breaking up in the mid-range though. At like half throttle, it started like popping and banging or something, so I'm gonna have to figure that out. But in the meantime, I'm gonna go ahead and try to get these color back on these plastics. Several people said that you can use a heat gun, you could use a torch, and it'll bring these back to the original color. I've seen the videos before, but I think it is only like a certain plastic. Like I think this might work, but I don't know about this one. But they're already so bad that I really don't even care if I mess them up, so I'm willing to try it. We'll try a heat gun, we'll try a torch. I'll try anything to get these back to the original color. But before I do any of that, I'm gonna go ahead and get these super clean, and then we'll try it out. I'm gonna try and stuff some of the steel wool down in these exhausts just to try to quieten them down a little bit, because it is like obnoxiously loud. So I'll stuff a little bit of this down in there and hopefully it'll kind of quieten it down a little bit. Wow, this thing actually cleaned up really nice. All the other places besides the discolored plastics, obviously. Like all the dark stuff looks super good. That all cleaned up super good. So I'm just gonna start like right here on this little cover, because this is something that's replaceable. So we'll just start right here. You can see it's actually a little bit more red than the actual plastics. But we'll try to get it back to at least somewhat better than it is now. But if I can get these plastics back to, you know, a good color, this thing would actually be pretty nice, because like I said, all these other stuff is really nice on it. Even the A-arms, I mean, they're super dirty right now, but no paint's chipping, it doesn't have any rust or anything, so. All right, so we'll start with a little baby heat gun. Just a little tiny one. We'll see if it does anything. Okay, so you can see it's kind of working. I got a little bit bigger heat gun, so I guess I'll try it out and see if it works better. Okay, so it's slow and incredibly tedious, but it is working. I mean, you can see it's bringing it back to the original color. So I guess I'm gonna have to spend a couple hours out here trying to do this. I might try to put a blowtorch to it. Maybe it'll work faster. It's probably a terrible idea. I do have a big torch too. Maybe I'll try it, I don't know. But I'll get to work on these. Hopefully I can get them all back to the original color, but I guess we'll see. All right, so it's working great, but it is taking forever. So I'm gonna try the blowtorch and to see if this will go by a little bit faster. So you can see it does kind of leave like some lines, kind of like when you're welding, when you make the little bubble, like you can see the little outline. So I'm gonna have to kind of go back over it and get those out, but it looks way better than it did. So I guess we're just going to use the blowtorch because it is so much faster. We'll go ahead and get the rest of these cleaned up. Okay, that worked way better than I thought it would. So you can see there is a bunch of little lines in it. I will go back through and try to get all those out, but I don't really care. It looks way better than it did before, so I'm happy. But we'll go ahead and get this thing put together. I'm also gonna put some speakers and stuff in this thing. Because like I said, I am gonna be taking it out to a mud ride in a couple weeks, so I'm gonna go ahead and try to get these speakers and stuff hooked up and try to get this snorkel kit put on. I'm sure that's gonna be kind of an adventure in itself. So this is the soundbar I went and got. See, it's a Boss Audio 34-inch soundbar. It's pretty big. I actually bought this thing used, so I have no idea if it works or not. But we're about to find out because I'm about to hook it up. So I guess we'll see. I think that'd be a good spot. Just right behind our heads. So I did want to mount it up here, but it's actually too wide. So you can see it would hit these little like beam things right here. So I'm just gonna mount it right here, and there's nowhere to mount it up here. So I'm just gonna mount it right here. This thing is massive, as you can see, but I think that's a pretty good spot. All right, so you can see, I guess this was made for like a bigger pipe or something, but you can see that that's not holding it down at all. So all I'm gonna do, I've got some wood shims here. I'm gonna just squeeze those in there and tighten it down. And that should hold it on there. So I might have to put some more shims in there because it is a little wobbly, but it's pretty secure. I'm gonna go ahead and get all these wires and stuff hooked up. It has its own like little Bluetooth controller and everything with a built-in amp into the box. So all you gotta do is hook up your positive wire and your ground wire and hook it into the speaker right here. So we'll get this all hooked up and just see if it works. All right, so I got this thing all hooked up. You can see it's on. Got all the wires hooked up. This thing's pretty cool. So it actually has 4 different settings for the bass. So it has like a no bass, a little more, and then a lot of bass. And you can turn it up and down, skip your song, pause or play, and then it actually has a light up here. It's a dome light that you can turn on by pressing that button. Or right here. So I'm actually think I'm gonna flip this thing over and put it on this bar instead. I know it's gonna hit like right here, but I think because those have enough play in them, because you know it still moves, that I'll make it work. So I'm actually gonna flip it upside down and put it up there instead. And then I'll get this controller mounted up here in a good spot. All right, so I finally got it mounted up there. It took way longer than I'd like to admit, but it is up there. It's only held out by 1 clamp right now, but I think that's a pretty good spot for it. Now I just got to get all my wires ran and find a good spot for this little controller. So like I said, I am going to be taking this thing on a mud rod. So I actually bought a really nice set of wheels and tires for this thing. You can see they're 33-inch BKTs on 20s. They just barely fit on here. You can see I don't have a lift on it. It's just stock, obviously, and the tire clearance is basically none. I have these shocks like maxed out. There's just barely enough clearance there for them to fit when you're turning, but I did get a set of wheel spacers ordered, just 2-inch wheel spacers, and that will help a little bit, but I probably will end up getting a lift for this thing, hopefully before the mud ride in a couple weeks. But I'm not gonna have them long. I'll probably only keep this thing for 1 ride, but these tires do look really nice on here, and it sits way higher, as you can see. Honestly, when I bought this thing, I really thought it was gonna be kind of a beater, just something I was gonna take out and not really care much about, but honestly, it kind of turned out pretty nice. Like, with these wheels and tires on it and the plastic somewhat back to their original color, I mean, this thing looks nice. Like I said, it is still running a little weird. I didn't want to go too hard on it on the first ride, but I was basically only going to like half throttle, but right at half throttle, it would kind of break up it a little bit, kind of like it's running a little lean or something. And I think that's just due to these exhausts. I wouldn't think it would affect it much, but I went ahead and just got a programmer for it, just so it'll have a little bit more fuel to kind of compensate for it. And hopefully that'll fix that little bit of stuttering issue. So now I'm just waiting on parts. I'll get that programmer, some wheel spacers, and there's a few little other stuff I gotta do, like getting this wiring ran, and I really wanna get this heater working. All the wires going up to it are good, so I'm guessing it's something to do inside there. So I'm gonna have to pull this off and look internally and see what's going on, but that's all I'm gonna do for this video because it has gotten way too long. But I'll get that programmer and then wheel spacers ordered, potentially a lift kit, and I want to get snorkels put on. I might do a little video on going out to that mud ride because I am going to be pretty hard on this thing. I'm not entirely sure if I want to, just because this channel's kind of just working on stuff, not really, you know, going out and riding, but I'll probably film a lot anyway and decide later. I really appreciate all the new subscribers. The last video, I literally got like 800 subscribers, so thank you guys so much for that. I'm never gonna push, you know, telling you guys to subscribe, but I really do appreciate it. It means a lot to me that people are actually enjoying the videos I'm making, so I'm gonna keep it up, and I'll see you guys on the next one.